Yakuza, a series known for its incredible stories full of ridiculous chaos and emotional moments that make you cry harder than watching The Notebook alone. Characters that become more important to you than your own mother and make you neglect your real life friends and responsibilities. And for the insane amount of ass you beat that makes you feel like Chris Brown. Because he's a good dancer, of course. All of this, plus the hours upon hours of glorious side content, combines to make one of the greatest franchises of all time. All of these games are fantastic and are at least an 8 out of 10. However, some are obviously better than others, even if only by a little bit. This is my own ranking of the Yakuza franchise based on things like overall enjoyment, the story, the combat, and the unique differences between all of them. If we rewind like a few seconds ago, Olive said that all games were 8 out of 10, but that's just obviously not true if you're not geriatric and belong in a home because Yakuza 3. This game, holy shit, this game sucks so bad. It's awful. To start off, the story starts with the main character, our boy, our hero, Kiryu Kazuma, running an orphanage, which is great. It's a great break from the intense, crazy shit that is the first two games, right? So it feels so in line with this character, and it's cool to see him take care of these kids and do these things and build the bond and the connection with them. And that's great and all until you're like literally hours into the game and still doing fetch quests for the children. Man, it is so boring. And to top it off, the story just doesn't really get any better. Something to do with a dead guy returning, and like all the villains kind of just suck, except for the arguably the main villain, Mine. Man, he's cool. Holy cow, he's cool. He's so cool. Except for his motives are also dog shit. But other than that, he's kind of just like the new age Yakuza in terms of how everything is more about money and less about the actual physical side of being a Yakuza. And he's a really great contrast to Kiryu, as well as shows some similarities. So it helps the connection between the characters. He's great. Unfortunately, he just does not stick the landing and save the game. Other than that, the story really is just dog shit. It has a really unsavory ending. Honestly, just didn't need to happen this game. I mean, I'm glad it did because it led to, you know, the rest of the games, which are all absolute heaters, but this one just really stunk. And to top everything off, it had really slow, blocky, just absolutely wonky combat that you really just couldn't control your character with. It felt like every time you swung, you'd be so hard stuck in that animation in that direction you were going. If somebody dodged, man, I sure hope you got fast reflexes because Kiryu doesn't. Holy shit. Like, it was so stiff and so unfun, honestly. A lot of the bosses had ridiculous amounts of health, and to top it off, they would all just block like crazy. So it was pretty much just who could get in the most throws and do the most damage. Some of these boss fights genuinely lasted like 5-10 minutes, and it was way too long, and they just weren't fun to get through. It was just miserable. It just not ideal. And as far as side content goes, I'm going to be honest, I have no idea. This game was so bad that I had to go for that any percent speed run because it just was not enjoyable to get through. I mean, it had enjoyable parts, don't get me wrong, but it just was not anywhere near as good as it should have or could have been. And so for that reason, this game lands at my number 11th spot. Moving on to my number 10th spot, we have Yakuza Kiwami 1. This game was really cool and originally came out in 2005, and the remake, Kiwami 1, released in, I think, 2016, was a really cool introduction to our character, Kiryu Kazuma, and the world that is Kamurocho, the Yakuza franchise, all that. The biggest gripe that I have ends in the story. The story while having a ton of cool moments, was just really disappointing. There's this big buildup between the main character and his brother, and how his brother used to be a good guy, but now he's a bad guy after Kiryu was in jail. And man, there was so much buildup and not a whole lot of his brother, and then a little bit more buildup and not a whole lot of his brother. And then you get to the end of the story, and there's still not very much of his brother. So you don't really get that cool rivalry and that cool connection and that cool, like, I want to take you back to the good side, because you don't know much about his brother. He was hardly in the story at all, other than a couple of guest appearances here and there. He had a really stinky ending, a really awesome boss fight, but just it did not hit as hard as it should have. And that's why, for if I had one word to describe this game, it would just be disappointing. Like, it just was not as good as it should have been. As far as the combat goes, it was really fun. Pretty much the same exact combat system as the prequel game, Yakuza 0, with the 4 styles that you can switch between. Although this time they had a new feature, the Dragon of Dojima style, and that was really cool in terms of how you progress through it. It wasn't like the others where you just gain XP, put in a couple of skills, slap some dudes on the ass and call it a day. For the Dragon of Dojima, you had to fight one of the hands down one of the best characters in the entire franchise, Majima. You had to fight him in all these different circumstances, I guess, and just all around town, really. And through doing that, you would unlock skills for this Dragon of Dojima. So that was fun and a really cool way. Unfortunately, they didn't stick the landing on that one either. It was at times unclear where to go, how to progress, just really what to do. And that, for me, I got to like the first hump and couldn't figure out how to get over that, so I just didn't use the style for the entire game, which sucked because it's a really cool style. Again, missed the landing. Also, Majima would show up everywhere around town. So, and this is a fully fledged boss fight, like, right? He's got tons of health bars, insane amounts of damage, right? Just like any other boss fight, but he's showing up every 5 minutes. And when you're going from story mission to story mission, right, you're doing all this crazy stuff, you're maybe low health, low on items, maybe just don't want to get into a boss fight all the time, you're kind of fucked and forced into it. And that also sucked and should have been handled better. But other than that, the game had, as per usual, banger side quests, good mini games, pretty much just all the classics. Nothing really stood out in the side content part. Maybe disappointing or not, regardless, the entire game lands in my 10th spot for just not meeting the expectations that it should have. Moving on to Yakuza 5. Yakuza 5 is in a very similar boat to Kiwami in terms of just a little bit disappointing. It had a lot of stuff going for it that could have been really good. Unfortunately, just fell short with too many mistakes and missteps in terms of the story, the characters. So with Yakuza 5, what's unique about it, like Yakuza 4, there's multiple playable characters. This time there's 5, that being Kiryu, Saejima, Akiyama, Shinada, and this time also Haruka, Kiryu's daughter, which was interesting. So basically, just to get into the story, right, you play a couple different chapters, each character at a time. You beat some ass, you uncover more of the big overall story that connects with the other characters. It's kind of cool. Kiryu's part was really fun and had this cool little like taxi driving minigame that was low-key kind of fun to do. He had really good combat too. He kept a lot of his abilities from the last few games, which was nice, not having to unlock the same abilities every time. Kiryu's part, I thought, was really good. And then we move on to Saijima's part, which kind of sucked. He spent 25 years in prison. This is his whole backstory, right? Spending 25 years in prison, doing all that for a big, massive shootout. He finally gets out. A year later, he's like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going back in the slammer because that's going to toughen me up or something, I guess, because 25 years of fucking prison didn't do that. I don't know. It didn't really make sense. It felt way too forced considering he broke out of prison already in the game prior. It just wasn't necessary. And to top it off, the prison part sucked. It was boring. It was just running around doing fetch quests, not a lot of combat. The story in it was kind of boring. Interesting characters, but just felt like, what does this have to do with the overarching story? And for the most part, it really had nothing to do and felt like a big filler. And his combat felt identical to 4. Nothing really stood out to make it evolve, change, anything like that. Again, big stinker there. I will say it was pretty cool getting to fist fight a man-eating bear in the snowy mountains, but then the hunting part after that sucked. Thankfully, it wasn't too long. Yes, I said hunting part because part of Saijima's whole thing in this game is that he can go hunting in the mountains, because that makes sense for a Yakuza game. Listen, I don't really understand it. I didn't write these games, but it's unique, I guess. I'll give him that. And then moving on to our next part, which would be Haruka and Akiyama. This part was the most disappointing because Akiyama, being literally probably the most liked character from the entire fan base, maybe that's debatable, but his part was cut short, and his part felt forced into Haruka's part and was shortened because of Haruka's part, and that was a real shame because, again, Akiyama, the beloved character, he's getting less screen time, less playing time. You know, his combat's still fun as ever, but you don't get as much of it, and his whole reason of why he's dragged in just felt, again, forced into Haruka's part, and it was really just a shame. The reason why I say Haruka's part is so bad is because she doesn't go from, like, you know, being this little kid to being like a Taekwondo kid or learning any fighting moves from Kiryu or anything like this. Instead, she decides to become an idol. And that was really boring because instead of, you know, getting to go around town, beat some ass like there's no tomorrow, you just do dance battles in the street, which sucks and is just not fun and really just not useful at all. Her story was kind of cool though, kind of interesting, good characters again, but again just felt a little shoehorned in terms of how they dragged Akiyama in. Again, just pretty disappointing. Now the last character, Shinada's just cool as fuck, man. He's just a really fun, lighthearted character that we don't get to see a lot in this franchise, right? Because this franchise is pretty dark, aside from its extremely goofy moments, like catching a thief who wears panties on his face. He's a nice refresher to, like, the outside world, someone who isn't a part of the Yakuza. He's not doing a ton of scammy stuff. He's just a regular dude scraping by, trying to make ends meet, pay off his dues, and gets roped into this whole mess. His story was fascinating too. Good characters. How his story roped into the others made absolutely no sense to me, and just, again, felt extremely forced. That's kind of the theme of this game, is everything just feels a little forced. But overall, his part was really good. He had kind of cool combat. It was a less than favorable, but with some upgrades felt fine, passable, still fun as hell. His part was great, and in terms of the overall story, everything coming together, those final chapters where you play between all the characters, really fun. Still a little silly in terms of how everything kind of wraps up, motivations. It was whatever. Still an enjoyable game, but again, just a little disappointing, and that's why it just doesn't go any higher than my 9th place. Like a Dragon Ishin, the only game where you can canonically kill people as Kiryu. Now we're starting to get into really, really good games. Like all the games before, they're still fun, aside from Yakuza 3. They're still fun, they're still a blast to play, but now it's like the dial's cranked up to 11, and it's only going to keep getting cranked up. So this game, like Kiwami 1, like Yakuza 0, like the Judgment games, has 4 styles that you can fight between, and the progression through these styles in terms of upgrades and that stuff is awesome. It's probably maybe some of the best upgrades in the game in terms of just how progressive it is and how it really feels like you're making a big difference going through the skill trees. And on top of that, you have your own sword and gun, right, which play into the different styles. And that's really cool too, in terms of how you can upgrade the swords, craft new swords, you know, same thing with the guns and your armor and stuff like that. And for once in the series, it actually feels moderately important to keep up on these things, or else you'll fall behind. You'll stop doing enough damage, and you'll just get slapped around like Chris Rock. But the combat is just so fun. It flows well. It feels like the older games, just with a nice brand new paint of coat. And that's fine by me. The old games are still fun. They're still a lot of fun. And yeah, so I mean, this game just really blows the combat out of the water. The story is really cool. It uses the same characters from obviously the future in the story and puts them way back in the 1860s in the samurai era, and it's a really good story, awesome characters, it's really gripping, just constant balls against the walls. It's just a really fun experience, and I think is best enjoyed after playing all the games and getting all of the characters, getting all the connections, and kind of just understanding how they work. I think that is when this game is best enjoyed. And this game was great. My biggest complaint, I guess, is just it felt a little bit more like a remaster than a remake. The graphics were awesome, looked really good, but again, it still felt like the older games, which isn't bad. But for a remake, you kind of expect, new, fresh animations, a newer style of combat. But other than that, this game's great. The only reason it isn't higher is just because the other games are just simply better in terms of story and combat and everything else. So, all of that, punching this in at number 8. Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is the first mainline game where Kiryu is not the main character, and also the first game to change up the combat style completely in terms of how it is turn-based RPG, and they dive really hard into that. This game was a lot of fun. It felt very fresh, very new. The main character, Kasuga, is awesome. He is similar to Kiryu in terms of morals, beliefs, everything like that. And it's nice to see those similarities, the important similarities. But he also has a couple contrasts too in terms of how he does things. He's definitely not as cool. He's a little bit more silly, way more energetic, and that's fine. It's great. It's refreshing. It feels nice, and just gives this game a nice coat of paint that feels good and is very entertaining to play and to watch. The combat, while fun, is not as fleshed out as it should be. There's a couple of things that stop it from being really good, but I think for their first dive into turn-based combat, it's good. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It gets the job done until maybe a few chapters from the end. It really just starts to suck. All the upgrades, or rather, new skills that you unlock, are just more expensive versions of previous skills. Same animation, sometimes like pretty close to the same damage too, so it doesn't even feel worth using them. Just not a lot of variation there, and that hurts in terms of keeping you hooked into the combat, because the combat starts to get really, really boring and just become a slog at the end where you're just dragging your feet through mud because there's just nothing new. Like, you're not evolving, it's not keeping you gripped because there's just not a lot going on. You're just spamming the same skills, and the enemies all react the same. It doesn't matter really how resistant they are to certain stuff, especially when all you have to do is just get on Hanjungi and just absolutely spam the fuck out of head trauma. That thing is OP as hell, and I'm so glad it's in the game. But again, just goes to further how it doesn't really matter how you play. There's no tacticalness to it, no strategy. You kind of just spam the same skills, hope it does enough damage, and if not, spam heals. And that, again, is fun for a while until probably about 3/4 in when it gets really boring. This game is absolutely saved by its incredible story, though. Just absolutely phenomenal. Great characters, awesome bonding between the characters. That's a big part in this game, is bonding with your party members. And it feels nice. It feels fun, and it's exciting to build that connection between the characters. The story overall is awesome, right? Kasuga gets out of prison, he meets these people, kind of gets involved with this story in Yokohama, and just it spirals deeper and deeper. You try and uncover stuff. It's just classic Yakuza story that absolutely slaps with some standout characters throughout the entire series that really just keep it going. Some major events happen too, and it's nice to see some real repercussions to the stories. So, all of that, this game is great. Unfortunately, the combat didn't stick the landing. However, I'm extremely optimistic for Infinite Wealth. I think that game is going to be awesome. It's going to improve on everything that this game didn't, and I think it's going to be great. All of that is going to make this come in at number 8. Yakuza 4 made slogging through the uncomfortable shit stain that is Yakuza 3 so worth it, because this game is awesome. For a lot of people, it's a fan favorite, and for good reason too. It's got some of the best combat in the entire franchise, and it begins playing with the multiple characters, right? This time you're playing as 4 characters: Kiryu, Akiyama, Saejima, and Tanimura, and all the characters slap. Their combat is so fun, so unique, and so different from each other, and it's nice to get that difference between just Kiryu's combat every single time. Same animation, same heat finishes, whatever. These guys all vary entirely different in their combat, and it's refreshing as well as just so enjoyable. It's so hard to get bored of this combat because you just beat ass like a fucking transformer slamming down a child. Like, it's incredible. The characters' stories are all fun, very wacky. The overarching story is a little wacky, but it's not bad by any means. It's still really good. I believe that the way that they all connect together feels nice, and it's awesome to just progress through the upgrades, meet new characters. I cannot stress how much of a blast this game is, why it's everyone's favorite. I would say the thing that holds this game back from a higher ranking is, I mentioned it before, the story gets a little wacky, and like some of the reasons why stuff happens just feels a little silly and forced, which was fine because the story overall was still fun to play through and still intriguing and had finally a solid ending. But the wacky moments kind of took you out a couple of times. But other than that, this game is still phenomenal, and just it only goes uphill from here. Moving on to Yakuza 0, which is the ultimate prequel that sets up some of the most important characters in the entire franchise, that obviously being Kiryu Kazuma and Majima Goro, probably some of the best characters in the entire franchise. This game is great in setting up the world, mainly Kamurocho and Sotenbori, the 2 main maps that you play between. It's a great Kiryu story more than anything. We see him figure out who he wants to be as a Yakuza, as a person, as a man, and how he wants to deal with things. We see him take upon his own burdens, other people's burdens. We figure out what's important to him. It's just a great setup and also a great showing of who he is. For Majima's section, his character arc was awesome because we get to see why he chooses rather to become the mad dog of Shimano, why he's crazy, why he's wacky and does silly shit all the time, but also has a couple of serious tones to him too. And so it's nice to see why he's like that and what led him to choose that path. And they do that so beautifully. Majima is easily one of the best written characters in the entire franchise, and we see that throughout every single game. He's just constantly awesome. The combat's great, introducing the 4 styles each for each character. For the most part, it's pretty much just 3 styles of character, but they're all fun, really good upgrades that help flesh out the combat. I mean, like everything. My biggest gripe with this game is that it fails to set up just a few characters for the first game, which are like low-key kind of important, like Kiryu's love interest and Nishikiyama's sister. But other than that, man, this game slaps. The story is so incredible, and all the antagonists stand high on the pedestal ranking of antagonists in this series. They're all so cool, so fun to play against, and just progress through the story against. Overall, this game slaps, bringing this to my number 5 spot. Kiwami 2 is a remake of the second game, released a year later after the first game, and chronologically the first game in the new Dragon engine. This game is gorgeous from top to bottom, start to finish. Not only in story, combat, and style, but also visually. It's still one of the best looking games I've ever seen, even though it came out late 2017. The story blows the first game out of the water. I said the story was, for the most part, okay in the first game. Man, the story in this game is incredible. They definitely honed in on the story for this game, and it shows. The characters spot on, and just progressing through it, it feels so nice. You meet so many great characters along the way that are all boosted from the fantastic looking character models and voice acting. And it's just such an incredible story with easily, hands down, the best antagonist ever in the entire franchise. And I don't care if you say different, you're wrong. This guy is so cool. Ryuji Goda stands above the rest in terms of his morals, rather, his motive is kind of just being the best, the very best that no one ever was. And he's so cool. He's so badass. He's almost similar to Nishiki in terms of what part he plays in the story, but man, he does it so much better. He's actually active in the story. You're constantly facing off against him and his goons. You're seeing what he's doing. A lot of the things that he's doing makes sense, right? Working with the other guys, going against other bad guys, it all makes sense and is so cool to watch. He's just such a cool character and also has such an incredible final boss fight that is so fun and dramatic, and you're just at the edge of your seat, nuts hanging off, dripping with sweat, just like, what's going to happen next? It's so thrilling, and he brings such an amazing performance like no other boss, and brings this game up like 3 rankings just because of him alone. And that says a lot, because this game is already incredible. The combat's fun, right? They get rid of the multiple styles and just hone in on Kiryu's one style, brawler, or I guess rather the Dragon of Dojima style. The upgrades feel nice, again, necessary, build upon what's already there, and is just really satisfying to progress through. As well as the new upgraded Dragon engine enhances the combat tenfold. I mean, like, movement feels nice and clean and under your control for once. It's not just like strict animations, but rather like reactive between characters. And when you block, you actually block where they're throwing the attack. It's really cool, and it's really fun. It feels so fluid for once. Basically, the combat in this game is just a constant edge. It's awesome. Overall, this game slaps. It's got some incredible side content. I loved the Cabaret Club side game that was in the prequel game as well. This game was just incredible, and I could not give number 4 to any other spot than Kiwami 2. Now, moving on to one of the longest names in the entire series, Like a Dragon, Gaiden, the man who erased his name, which released just in 2023. It's a smaller story about Kiryu after the events of 6 and during the run of Kasuga's run of Like a Dragon. And it returns to the live combat using 2 different styles, Kiryu's classic Dragon of Dojima style, as well as his new style, which uses a ton of new gadgets and is a way more technical style, and both are so fun to use. Again, the upgrades are fantastic, especially when you start upgrading the gadgets. They're so fun to use. You run around feeling like Inspector Gadget. It's so cool and so aesthetically pleasing, especially with all the particle effects and the big flashy colors, the big attacks, the awesome heat finishes. Easily maybe the second or third best combat in the entire series. So fun, and just has so much energy and style to it. It's so refreshing and so gorgeous to look at. The story is really, really good too. For being a side story, it feels so important, and it is really important, and really ties in well to Kasuga's Like a Dragon story. Again, just an absolute blast to play through. It's got a ton of really, really, really good side content too. I think this was the only game where I almost accidentally did all of the side missions just because they were so fun to get through. I wanted more money for upgrades. It was awesome. And on top of that, they had the battle arena, which had a ton of different stuff between, a ton of people fighting another ton of people, 1v1s, 4v4s, whatever. Just awesome fights. Tons of ways to express how good the combat is. And I cannot believe that this game is just a cute little side story because it feels so much more and so important to the story as well as Kiryu's story. And it has one of the most tear jerking endings ever. Man, this shit had me looking like this. It was so gut wrenching, but it was so gorgeous. Again, I cannot believe that they called this a side story. It feels like a whole brand new main entry. It's so good. This game just perfectly fits into number 3. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Moving on to another game where Kiryu is no longer the main character, Judgment. This game actually has little to do with Kiryu and his events, but still takes place in Kamurocho, the main series of the franchise. For this two-part series, we play as Yagami Takayuki, and he's cool. Like, he is just the definition of cool. You know, runs around with a chain around his hip, a freaking leather jacket. Like, this dude just looks cool. He's got an awesome looking combat style. It's so aesthetic and flashy. You know, it feels like he purposely incorporates cool style into it to look cooler, right? Because he's super cool. Don't count how many times I said cool. He's an awesome main character also in terms of his internal struggles, right? His internal conflicts on, you know, what to do about what the law can't judge, or, you know, how he can judge what's right and wrong and judge characters. Again, the name of the game is called Judgment, so obviously it's going to be a big thing, but it's really cool, fresh set of eyes. Also, in terms of how he is on the other side of the crime system, right? He used to be a lawyer and now works as a detective agency, obviously working with his old lawyer buddies to defend and prosecute. So it's a nice, fresh, new coat of paint that feels justified and is really fun to play through. Also, as a detective game, it feels really satisfying in terms of how you know, go through a crime scene or put two and two together. In terms of its detective mechanics, they all feel really fun. Your chases, your tails, stuff like that are just so cool. The story is so good and has a lot of relatable features with relatable characters too, right? It's the big thing is a drug that is supposed to cure Alzheimer's, which Alzheimer's unfortunately affects a lot of people and their families. So having that be something so grounded to real life feels sweet almost. And it makes the story way more connectable, the characters way more connectable, and it's interesting to see something a little more human than something like the rest of the Yakuza series. So this game was a really nice breath of fresh air and incredible combat, almost. Kinda, I take back incredible. It's got really good combat. It's got two styles this time, Tiger and Crane style. Tiger style is really cool. It's got tons of new flashy upgrades. They all feel good. It's got way too many cheese like attacks though, I guess. Like Flux Fissure, you can just destroy anybody with that in a matter of seconds. It's way too easy. And then Crane style, for some reason, has 0 upgrades, so it has no progression through it. It kind of feels obsolete to use after the first hour or so of the game once you finally have a few upgrades for the Tiger style. Like, I guess it gets a little upgrades through, like, overall upgrades between the styles, but again, just not enough to justify using. I can count on my fingers how many times I chose to use Crane style, and it's not a lot. So the combat falls short there, but when you are using Tiger style, it's still a blast. You're still just gut punching the shit out of dudes. It's great. This game also has awesome side content in that there's 50 friends that you can make around the city, you know, doing whether it's fetch quests, just talking to them, eating at their restaurant, whatever. You build this friendship with them to unlock other side missions, other friends, this and that. And it's so awesome. And again, feels really connectable and relatable. Feels like you're meeting real people to a certain extent. And it's just satisfying to get through all of the friends and feels nice to progress across the city, becoming friends with these people. And on top of that, This game introduces something really cool, and that's girlfriends. So you no longer have to dream about the girls that you can't talk to, but now you can talk to the virtual women in this game as a really, really badass character. All jokes aside, though, the girlfriends are actually really fun to do. They're like interesting characters with interesting stories that have you doing some really fun stuff, and it's nice to kind of grow and peer into the hearts of these characters. It sounds cringy, but it is actually really fun to do. Maybe I'm just lonely, whatever. Overall, this game slaps and definitely deserves the number 2 spot, falling short only just a little bit for just a few things. Moving on to the number 1 spot, I could not decide between Yakuza 6 and Lost Judgment which deserve the number 1 spot more. It was so hard for me to pick. So I just said fuck it and decided they both deserve number 1 spot because they're both so good. But we'll start with Yakuza 6. This game was just gorgeous. Like, if I had one word to describe this game, the entire game just, man, this game was so good. And it's a very grounded and emotional game for Kiryu, especially, which was nice to see. And it just felt like such a human story. For the most part, obviously, it's still a Yakuza game. There's still going to be some wacky shit that happens. It was supposed to be the send-off for Kiryu's character, and it felt like a really good way to do that. Starting with the story, it was just a gorgeous story, man. Getting to hang out with basically his grandson the whole time, try and find his grandson's dad, meet tons of new characters that have nothing to do with Kamurocho, and just such an emotional story that will genuinely have you tearing up. No matter how masculine you think you are, this shit will break you, and for a good reason too. It's just a really beautiful story that I could not be happier putting at number 6 for the story or number 1 for the story alone. But on top of that, the combat's good. Not as good as Kiwami 2, because it came out just a little bit before and was the first game in the Dragon Engine. So a lot of experimenting there. Again, really fun combat. Some of the upgrades felt weird in terms of how you unlocked them. You had 5 different XP, I guess. And so some of them would be really expensive in some categories of XP and like really cheap in other categories. It felt a little weird unlocking some of them. The upgrades weren't great in terms of unlocking them, but the upgrades themselves were good and felt like more than just stat boosts. Still really fun combat. It was missing a couple of key heat finishers too, but again, not to keep dogging on it, still great and still solid as ever. I also think this game has the best iteration of the heat gauge. The side content in this game was also really, really good. And for the first time, I'm pretty sure all of the side quests were fully voiced, which was really, really cool. That blew me away. And they were fun to do. Again, great characters through the side quests that you definitely should not be skipping. And just such a good game. Such an incredible story. Such gorgeous characters. And it just hits all the emotional beats that it needs to. And just, again, man, that shit'll tear you up for a great reason, man. It's so good and enjoyable to play through, and I highly recommend it. Now, next is Lost Judgment, where Lost Judgment came out in 2021 and basically said, all right, we made a shit ton of games. Let's take everything good from those games, remove all the bad, and take the good up by like another 6 levels. Holy shit, this game was really cool. I'm just going to start off with the best part of it, the combat. This game has 3 base styles, 1 DLC style, and they're all so fun to use, so unique. Again, bringing back the Tiger and the Crane style. This time, the Crane style actually has a ton of upgrades, and then adding a Snake style, which is parry-focused defensive style, I guess. Also really fun to use, and then also adding a Boxer style from the boxing minigame in this game. And man, all of these are so fun to use. There's not one style that feels better. It all just depends on the situation, your preferences, your upgrades, just whatever you feel like doing. It's so fluid. And again, so incredibly gorgeous to look at. The particle effects are so cool. Yagami's got such stylized technical fighting that feels nice and fresh, and he just does some of the coolest shit out there. You just run around feeling like Bruce Lee. It's awesome. And the upgrades are all so like important to do, it feels like. a ton of stat boosts, as well as nice, cool things to add into your combos, combo finishers. I cannot suck the dick of this game's combat more. It's so fun. And minus the story, the side content, everything alone, the combat in this game is the reason alone to get it. That being said, the story in this game also goes really hard and again is super, super relatable in that it focuses around bullying, which everyone encounters bullying, whether they were a bully, were bullied, saw it, whatever. Everybody knows what bullying is, and that makes this story so connectable, right? It's also, again, a great detective story. You're slowly uncovering the case until the very end when everything finally comes together and justice is finally brought. Great progression through, awesome characters, important emotional beats, all plus the great combat that you play through with some awesome boss fights. This game, I'd say my gripe for this game is that the boss fights are kind of few and far between, and when you do fight a boss, it's kind of just the same few bosses every time, which is a little disappointing, especially when the combat in this game is so good, but it's just a tiny little gripe, I guess. The side content in this game was also really unique in that it didn't do the friends thing, but it had this own little entire story with its separate school stories built it. Like, I forgot how many it is, but I think it's 10 individual school stories, and those are all each long to get through. And so that builds into a bigger overall side story that is really cool. I didn't progress super far in that, but it was a really cool idea, and I'm definitely going to go back and continue playing it later. It also has one of the best side series, I guess. One of the school stories in the game is Todoroki's boxing gym, and that one's awesome because not only is the story really cool, but it has an entirely different style of combat where you're in a ring. There's no kicking. It's just straight fists and technique in the boxing ring, and it's a blast to play through and progress through, and helps you unlock skills for your boxer style outside of the side quest. Just overall, this game is so great, mainly because of its combat, but is also supported by a really, really, really human story that feels satisfying to get through and is fun to progress through and uncover the case and the mystery. Plus, you can also skate wherever you want around town. Well, within restriction. You can skate around town on the roads, and it feels like a great way to get through town. Not only is it fun, but it's also nice to just be able to get through town fast without having to fast travel, so then you can experience more street fights along the way. Overall, I could not be happier putting these two games in my number one spot. Both are so phenomenal for their own respective reasons, and really just hit the mark for what the Yakuza series should be, and makes me super excited for the future of Yakuza, mainly Infinite Wealth coming out in just a few days. To sum everything up, the Yakuza games are so incredible with just such fantastic stories that'll make you want to call in sick for work, such silly moments that are you chuckling at the dumbest shit, and combat that just makes you feel like a man that transcended human life, and characters that make you want to skip hanging out with your real friends. If you haven't played these games, I would highly recommend. Most games are on Xbox Game Pass except for the Judgment games, and if you have played, let me know if you agree with these or not. That's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.